Okay, now this is part two of our training. We'll now start talking about what is applied behavior analysis. If you were to look at this diagram that we have over here, in the center you have ABA, which is a short form for applied behavior analysis. There are some very key distinct characteristics or important features of applied behavior analysis that sets it itself apart from other field. First, it's a science, which means that there are specific theories and principles that we follow and use it to bring about meaningful change in socially significant behavior, which is what is a key hallmark of applied behavior analysis. Also, ABA is data driven, which means that wherever we are wanting to bring about a behavior change, that is increase a behavior or decrease a behavior, we are very rigorous in collecting data, and we use this data to make decisions about any future changes. Third, whenever we are discussing behavior or focusing behavior, we are very objective in our descriptions, which means if we were to be addressing a tantrum, while tantrum is a broad descriptor, we try to define, our first step is to define it in a more objective manner so that this becomes measurable. And then once it becomes measurable, it then makes it easier for us to collect data on it, and hence the data-driven approach. It is also important to note that ABA is the only evidence-based intervention for autism, which means that there is enough and more than enough research which has been published over several years by several people across various settings, and they have all demonstrated increase and improvements in skills of individual to then say that yes, it is an evidence-based science. So it's important to keep in mind that ABA is a science. It is an only evidence-based intervention for children with autism. It is data-driven, and whenever we focus on behavior, which is socially significant, we define the behavior in an objective manner so that it can be made measurable. Okay, moving along. Now, what is ABA? Let's first talk about applied. Applied means, as I was saying, the focus is on meaningful behavior, which means that whenever we want to bring about any change in behavior, which is either increase a particular behavior, develop a new behavior, or decrease an existing behavior, it has to be meaningful for the child, which or an individual. So when I'm thinking about teaching a child how to respond to his name, that has to be meaningful. Similarly, making eye contact, telling your own name, using toilet independently, these are all meaningful behavior, and hence I use the science of behavior analysis and I apply it for meaningful behavior, which is what makes ABA applied. The first word is applied. Second is behavior. So we study how the behavior is learned and how to change it, which starts by defining the behavior in an observable and measurable terms. And third is analysis, which means that the behavior is examined within the environment to determine what factors are influencing the behavior. So if the child is crying or if the child is falling on the floor, I analyzed the behavior and I looked at various variables in the house setting, in the child's environment, in the classroom with the parents, and I try to understand what is the reason behind the child falling on the floor. Or if the child is tantruming, what is the reason behind child engaging in tantrum behavior? So in early intervention, you will learn a lot about how do we select what is a meaningful behavior, what are some strategies in which we can teach these meaningful behaviors, and whenever we are faced with a situation where the behavior is disruptive or problematic, how do we analyze our environment so that we can make sure that the behavior is that we are able to understand the maintaining reasons in the environment for the behavior. So as I was saying, the focus of ABA is to reduce maladaptive behavior. So crying, hitting, screaming, non-compliance, not following directions, these are all maladaptive behavior. The reason we call them maladaptive is because they interfere in the child's learning. And while we want to decrease these behaviors, we want to increase good behavior. So we want to increase appropriate behavior. So whenever the child is not hitting the sister or a brother, but is actually playing with them, how do I increase more of this good behavior? And then how do I increase new skills? So responding to name, playing with toys appropriately, going to the bathroom, how do I increase new skills? So in summary, this would be the focus of ABA. So whenever we are developing skill acquisition programs, how do we come about what to teach? How do we know what's the focus of teaching? This is what we would call as a goal identification. It is a team effort, which means that parents and caregivers, and depending upon the child's age, the teacher, grandparents, they're all part of this effort and they're all part of the discussion, and as a team we identify what are some important goals and how is it that we start working on these goals. As this is a team effort, we take into consideration the child's age and what is it that they're able to perform as their current skills, or what we would call as baseline. So whatever child is able to do at the moment, we build on those skills. If there are any problem behavior, or if there are any barriers to learning, language can be one barrier, a lot of tantrum behaviors can be another barrier. Sometimes children do not like to share their toys, they don't want the puzzles to be taken away, those can be barriers. So those are all important things to take into consideration when we are trying to identify what to teach a child. And like we also said, families, priorities, and family goals are also taken into consideration when we are identifying goals for teaching. In ABA, we use some systematic assessments. These are called ABLLS or VB-MAP. For social skills, we use a curriculum called as Socially Savvy. For functional living skills, we use assessment of functional living skills, language and learning, so and several more. So although in early intervention program, we'll not be using all of these assessment, however, there'll be a very small, short version of ABLLS that we will be using in our early intervention program. Now comes the part of how do we teach these programs. So once we have identified the goals, how do we teach? The basic idea of any teaching procedure has to be grounded in reinforcement, which means we use reinforcement based teaching. Reinforcements, as you will know and as you will study in day 2 videos, and whenever we provide reinforcement, it increases our behavior. So if you watch these videos and I give you candy at the end of the video, and you watch more videos and you get more candy, then candy is your reinforcement. And the same idea or the same philosophy we want to use when we are teaching children. We want to reinforce and bring about and make teaching fun and positive. And we do that by including the child's motivations, their preferences, and their choices in the teaching. We use the principles of behavior and other behavior-based strategies, and we'll speak a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And whenever we have to follow a prompting procedure, or whenever we have to correct a behavior, there is a sequence of corrections that we follow. By following these sequence, we are forming a predictable pattern of interaction with our child, so that we are not confusing them, we are not helping them when we should not be, or we are not letting them make too many errors so that it makes learning and teaching more frustrating. So there is a prompting procedure that we use, and we'll discuss that later in the PowerPoint that we follow. Okay, so we talked about how do we select a goal and how do we teach. So teaching all is based on reinforcement. We use the child's motivations, their preferences. We use a systematic procedure of prompting and correcting. Just an overview of how an ABA, a regular applied behavior analysis program, runs at Stepping Stone Center. We develop an IEP, or what we would call as an individualized educational plan. We complete as an assessment. A lot of what I talked about earlier on ABLLS, VB-MAP, etc., which gives us a baseline or an idea into the child's existing skills. We take families' input, their priorities into consideration, and then we also have a multidisciplinary assessment. We take the input from speech and OT. We put all of this information together and develop an education plan for the child. From this, once we have identified the goal, there is a monitoring progress, which means there's daily session notes that are collected. We take parent input on as an ongoing basis. If there's any data that needs to be gathered at home, we take into consideration the parent data and parent home goal if there is something that has to be considered. Then after a period of about 3 months, we have a review, which is a team review, where the team meets, and an IEP meeting, or an IEP review meeting, where we share the outcomes with the parents, and we discuss parental goals and parent training goals and parent training outcomes. So it's a very involved and an engaging process, which involves parents and caregivers as a very key component and an important part of the team. Here is a little bit of outcome data of our early intervention program. I thought it'll be interesting and nice to share, what kind of changes we have been seeing in children who have attended the 6 weeks program. As you can see, the little red color bars are all the skills that children were showing when they started the program. So on the left hand side is basically the total skills. So so red is what was the children's skill when they came and started the program, and green is the skill that we saw that children were able to develop at the end of 6 weeks. So there has been a significant increase in children's skill acquisition in just the 6 weeks, and a lot of it is because of parent training, where we are training the parents to implement these education programs with the children, skill acquisition program with the children, and under strict supervision and under close supervision, and the outcomes are quite good. And we are also seeing similar results for when it comes to problem behavior. The red is the problem behavior that children were showing when they started the program, and green is the problem behavior at the end of the program. You will also be asked as a parent to complete some data at the start of the program and some data at the end of the program. And this allows us to keep track of the outcomes and how effective the program has been. Okay. As a quick overview of the early intervention program, there are 3 key components. There is one area of skill acquisition where we work on functional language, adaptive skills. Then there is a domain of behavior management. And the third, very, very important, is parental involvement, which means that here is where we train you on how to work with your kid on developing functional skills on a daily basis. Some of the areas of skill development that will be focused in early intervention are here. It's a list. The first one is cooperation or learner readiness, meaning is a child able to follow your simple instructions? Is he willing to share his reinforcers with you? Second is visual performance, and I'll talk a little bit about each of these in my slides that will follow. Motor imitation, vocal imitation, group functioning, skills of daily living, gross motor skills, fine motor skills, and receptive and expressive language. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about what do we mean when we say we want to increase the cooperativeness or learner readiness. Essentially, what we find is there is, in general, whether a child has any delay or not, children tend to be unwilling to cooperate with adult demands. Now, the difficulty is in the degree of uncooperativeness. which tends to be much higher in children who have language delays. Now, this could be either because either they are not able to understand what is being asked of them, so it makes it difficult for them to follow along. Now, sometimes it's difficult to say, or it might get difficult to teach a child a skill if there's a lot of uncooperativeness. So hence we have to work on their willingness to be more cooperative and to be ready to learn, which could include something as simple as sitting with the parent at a particular given spot for more than, say, 2 seconds or 5 seconds, so that will allow the parent to then either work with them on a puzzle or play with them. However, if the child is not even willing or cooperating to sit with the parent, then it makes it difficult for us to teach them other skills. So hence this learner readiness and cooperativeness becomes important. The second very, very important domain is manding. You will hear this word a lot during early intervention program. Essentially, manding is a technical word for requesting. Is the child able to request? We want to teach a child to request his wants and needs. This is one of the very basic form of language which we develop even as babies, who don't have full-grown language. They are able to express their wants and needs by crying or making specific sound. And for children who have language deficits or any language delay, if they don't have any functional way of expressing themselves, we want to teach them as a first skill. In the absence of a functional language, we might find a lot of pulling of your hand, a lot of pointing. They'll just go stand by the reinforcer and not say anything. So there might be different kind of behaviors that they might be showing, but they're not what we would call as requesting behaviors. So this is essentially where if we also notice that children who can't ask for reinforcers, or they can't ask for their preferred items in a proper or a functional manner, we'll also see a lot of increase in negative behavior, a lot of increase in disruptive behavior, throwing things, headbanging, screaming, because they want something, even something as simple as wanting your attention, or not wanting something, meaning don't want to be hugged or don't want to leave a particular spot. The focus of requesting program is the child's motivations and preferences, or what we call as reinforcers. This can be anything, it can be food, it can't be food, it can be toy, it can be a particular kind of toy, it can be an activity, tickles, jump, spinning, any kind of a social reinforcer. We have to keep in mind that all these reinforcers continue to change, just like our preferences continue to change. If we like a particular dress one day, we may not like the same dress after 2 days or after 4 days or after 6 months. If we like a particular food now, our preference might change, and then we may not want the same food either every day or after a couple of times. When we are teaching requesting, we teach using various mechanisms depending upon the child's skill. So remember, when we talked about baseline, we talk about taking the child's skill into consideration. So which means that we want to always start with some kind of a word or some kind of a sound, even if it is an approximation. Now, if the child is non-verbal, then we start with signs. We try to teach them signs, approximations of sign for the specific word. If the child has very difficult or there's difficulty in motor skills, then we try to move to some kind of either picture exchange or some kind of an augmentative device. But we want to focus on using some form of functional communication that can travel with the child, and the child is able to express their wants and needs. So this is going to be a big area that you'll work on. The second is visual performance, and I have a picture of some puzzles here, a shape sorter, a matching activity that a child is doing. So visual performance essentially includes working on skills like completing puzzles, and the puzzles can be of various kind of difficulties. uh, and shape sorters, like I said, matching pictures. So putting all the cats together, putting all the dogs together, matching all the 3D pictures to 2D pictures, sorting pictures and sorting objects. So you put all the knife together, all the socks together, all the handkerchiefs together. So visual performance includes a lot of these activities in increasing complexity. Now, this is an important skill because a lot of these skills are used in the child's natural environment. Also, for a child to be able to perform a visual skill appropriately, it demonstrates that they have some very complex skills, which means they are able to attend to a visual stimuli or a visual object. They are able to show some form of discrimination, which means if they are putting a square shape in a shape that is cut out as a square, then not only are they attending to the piece square, they're also attending to the cut out shape. They are paying attention to that shape and not to the circle or the triangle that might be in their environment. So they pick the correct response and they go put the square block in where the square shape is supposed to go. So this is a very complex behavior, and it might seem very simple, but to be able to complete a puzzle, it involves paying attention to where the piece needs to go. It requires them to select the appropriate, the correct space, and not the other, and not get distracted by other spaces, and in the process complete the whole puzzle. So I have a couple of videos that I would like to show about visual performance. So let's watch them and then we will discuss it. All right, ready. Action. Let's do another one. Do the duck. We've never done that. Right? We've never done that. Action. Even. What? MOD even. See? Okay, so here in this video, as you notice, uh, they were working on matching, so matching objects to objects, and you can see how this is an important skill for a child to be able to perform. He was given 3 examples, and he had to pick which was the right one, and then place the correct one together. So keeping the duck together, keeping the blue wristband of some kind together, and things like that. So this is what would be visual performance. Okay, now let's look at the next program. This is motor imitation or vocal imitation. And the program means what it says. Essentially, we want to teach the child to be able to imitate either actions or sounds. So child's ability to imitate sound is extremely important towards development of their language. For non-verbal children, ability to imitate actions become very important, because then they're able to effectively and quickly learn signs, or be able to pick pictures and exchange pictures, or use any kind of a speech device. Imitation skill is also a complex skills because it requires a child to look at the person whose behavior they're supposed to imitate, and then either make the same action or repeat the same sound, and do it correctly and consistently. Now we increase the complexity of these actions, which means I might start by asking the child to repeat a particular sound, O. Then I might say or ask them to repeat a sound, a whole word. So open. And then I might work on having a whole long sentence. So things like open the door, open the book. Similarly, a motor sequence where I might start by just clapping hands, and then it could be clapping hands, touching your head, touching the table, tapping on the nose, so a whole sequence. So now let's watch an example from motor imitation as well.
We got our chips here. Do this. Job. Crunchy. Do this.
Okay, so this gives you an idea of what a motor imitation would look like, and how or what kind of actions we might work on when we are having a child work on a motor imitation. Okay, let's start and move along. The other domain that's important and that we work on in ABA, and it may not necessarily be touched on during EI because it's a shorter program, is group functioning or activities of daily living. In group functioning, essentially, we are looking at whether or not the child can follow directions in a small group setting. They should be able to do so without minimal prompt and minimal redirections. So think about a preschool setting. Uh, Also, are they able to engage with other peers and other students without much prompt? And then when we are looking at activities of daily living, this is where we start to train the children to be a little more independent from the very beginning. And we start them by teaching some very, very easy, simple skills. So even putting the plate on a counter, setting the table, these are simple skills of daily living that we can start to work on. Independence in the bathroom is another another big and important skill. Similarly, mealtime and dressing are other important areas. All right. The other domain that we'll focus on in early intervention, in addition to requesting, in addition to visual performance, is receptive and expressive language. And essentially, receptive and expressive language means what it says. Receptive means, is the child able to understand the words and the phrases that are spoken by another person, and then are they able to follow along and do as it says? Which means, can they follow simple directions? Can they follow, or can they identify simple objects in their environment based on what I might say? So if I say, go bring the book, put the shoes on the rack, find the picture of a daddy, where is the big blue ball in the storybook that I might be reading? These are all forms of receptive language. Expressive language essentially means, are they able to express themselves? Are they able to use words or signs to express themselves? Things like labeling items or objects in their environment. Can they show me the pink flower? Can they show me the brown dog? Can they show me the big red truck? Can they show me things to paint with? Can they show me things that we cook with? Um, what about labeling actions, emotions, or other environmental stimuli? Even things like prepositions, a picture that I have on the slide. Can they show me, or can they label that the cat is on, that the dish is on the cat? Answering questions, uh, WH questions or singing along. These are also some advanced form of expressive language that we work on once some of the basic expressive language has been mastered. Okay, so this is the end of part 2. We will continue in part 3.